Welcome back to the garage, you guys. It's always good to bring a bow home, get a really great finish on it, give it a dedicated string, finish out the grip area, and really see the fruition of our finished bow. So in this episode, we're going to take the hickory self bow that we've been working on and basically do all the finishing touches. Really, this is just kind of the fun part on the bow piece is being able to shoot it in, refine it, finish out the grips, put a finish on it, finish sanding. Finish sanding isn't necessarily fun. It's laborious, it's dusty, it's all those things. But I'm going to go over a few techniques that are going to make the sanding piece real effective for you and have a really great finished product when you're done. All right, guys, first things first, under the category of peaking and tweaking, I've had this bow out and shot it now several times. I want to say I'm probably up to 50 shots through this guy, and I am discovering that I'm a little bit out of alignment on my limbs, and so I'm going to be taking in the edges on these guys. They're tracking a little bit off to one side. And so this should bring them back into alignment, at least closer to alignment. Maybe not 100%, but much closer. All right, so we have thinned out the tips and done a little more work out here to kind of round these out and thin them down even more. I don't know if you can really see the extra file work that's been done here, but we've got these tips pretty thin. Turning now to the grip area, I have a couple of really thick straps here. These are actually reins for a horse reins, just extra cutoffs from some length. And I went ahead and just kind of ground them down on my sander just to kind of give them this rounded profile. I'm gonna do, and you can glue these onto your bow any way you choose. Wood glue would probably suffice, like a tight bond or something. Use like a barge cement or something like that, which would probably be your best bet. And I'm going to actually put these down with double stick tape. Guys, I have yet to truly ever be disappointed in using double stick tape. I just put one strip on each side here, and this is on. I'm pretty pleased with that. And it's instantaneous. That's the other thing. I'm going to go ahead and lay down some blue tape, and I should mention too that the wood right along here has been sanded to a 220 grit right through the grip, so that I don't have to worry about trying to sand right up to the leather and get a good finish. But what we're going to do is harden this leather to the degree, almost like putting a shell on it, so that we can work it like almost like a piece of wood with some super glue. And what we're going to do is just soak all of the raw soak all the leather with super glue like this. And what this does is give us the opportunity to then tool it with a rasp or what have you, sandpaper, so on. So I think I've given it enough time to dry up pretty well. I was paid particular attention once I turned off the camera to really get into these edges on both sides here. The real frilly stuff down at the edge, that's the stuff that we're really chasing down to clean up. Because once we've gone through and done this initial shaping and we start getting down to the areas that start producing some of that fuzz, we just repeat the process. So this may be a operation that you gotta carry on like 2, 3, 4 times before you get it just the way you want it. Okay, here's what I ended up with on the first run. So you can see I got some of that furriness kind of cropping up right here on this edge and some of the harder corners here, and also along this edge right here. So I'm going to go back and coat those areas with glue again, and I think I'm only going to have to do this one more time. All right guys, so here's our finished overlay, I guess, for our grip area. And just barely see a little bit of a line right here that I have put in place for the arrow pass. And so this is where our grip is, the leather grip is then going to go in place over here. The second part of the significance there is that we want to take this edge and kind of angle it toward the back. So we're going to kind of take some material off in this area right here, kind of make it a little thinner on the back side of the bow. So we shouldn't have any major issues with the tiller as a result of that, because this is the thickest piece of our bow. And by just taking that edge and easing it this way, just a slight like chamfer, okay, toward the center of the bow, is going to help our arrow pass. All right guys, I have gone through and kind of formed out the grip area. It's not really maybe the riser area, if that's what you want to call it. It's very subtle, but you can kind of pick up on how right here we've given it a little extra rounding off toward the belly side of the bow, and that's so that an arrow can pass just a little bit easier. All right, so I have rounded off the edges of this bow now, and I really like my bows to just be very, I don't know if the word is sinuous or how I want to describe it, but just everything flows gently together, and that's really what I am trying to accomplish with this. Now, before we can get on about any final sanding, we need to address the tips of our bow. If you're going to be putting on any tip overlays, now's the time to do it. And actually probably before we sanded out our edges, put on a tip overlay of either another hardwood or horn or bone or whatever you want to do. I want to keep this a very simple bow, and so I'm not going to put overlays on it, but I am going to give these tips a little bit of attention. What I'm looking to do is get something that looks a lot like this. So just kind of thumbnailed it, if that's what you want to call it. Just rounded over, really minimized its presence at the very tip of the bow. This is where mass is most costly, and we can really take a lot of mass away just by rounding a lot of this out right here. At that point, pretty much done with prep. I mean, we want to take a real fine file, maybe a single cut like this. You could work the double cut to some degree with it, but we should not have any tool marks anywhere on this bow, to the best of our ability, before we ever even begin to sand. We're not going to sand out tool marks, as we want the tool marks to be gone before we even get started. The only thing left to do at this point is give it a finish sanding and then put a finish on the bow itself. An important tip for sanding, you guys, obviously you want to sand with the grain of the wood. If hadn't been taught that in woodworking class, then That is a very important thing to understand. And this should be straight line all the way up and down your entire limb. If you do short strokes, let's say sand, 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 sand like this, you're going to end up with wipe marks all over the belly of your bow and the back of your bow and the sides of the bow, whatever the case may be. You want long flowing strokes all the way through. And what this long stroke through the main limb does is it marries what you did at the grip to what you did at the tip. And you just get a nice long stroke. And we are addressing this sandpaper only enough to get to cut some dust. We're not bearing down on it. We're not putting a lot of pressure down. Just enough to cut some dust. I have sanded this bow down now with both a 100 grit sandpaper and then came back with 220. And hopefully in the light there you can just see the sheen going on that limb. Now, you might be led to believe that that is well enough, but I'm going to tell you that truthfully, to get the best possible finish on this bow, here's your secret weapon. And this is just a wet rag. And we're just going to wet this limb down. Not soak it. We just want to get the wood wet. All right. And then we're going to let this dry. Okay, so we're dry, and I don't know that you can really tell in the camera view, but if you were to feel this, all of the grain on this bow has lifted. This piece of wood has got grain pieces lifting up all over the place. And that tells us that we have a little bit more to manage to take care of the smoothness on these limbs. We're going to put this through the same process. We're going to wet down these limbs, sand it again until it's smooth as glass, wet them down again, sand it smooth until it's as smooth as glass, wet it again, and repeat that until finally when we wet it down, it's just not lifting that much grain at all, if any. And when you're comfortable with the amount of grain that it's no longer lifting, then that becomes your finished sanding pass. And then we'll move on to the finish that we're going to put on this bow. I am going to be using tung oil to finish off this bow. I'm just applying it based on manufacturer's instructions back here. We're going to put a real heavy coating on here. I strongly encourage this activity directly after you finish sanding your bow. The sanding process kind of removes all surface oils, all of that sort of thing, and really preps your surface well for absorbing a finish. So the reason I like to use tung oil specifically, and this is field tested for me, I just happened to use it on the shaft of some arrows that I had made. I had dipped the crests, like dipped the feather areas, the feather end of the arrows in paint, and so I didn't paint them, rather I stained them a color and then did a crest and put on the feathers and whatnot. And on the front side of the crest where the shaft was raw, I went ahead and just used tung oil because tung oil is just a clear finish, and for no other reason. In the course of shooting that particular batch of arrows, I lost one, and I could not for the life of me find it. And this is out at an outdoor shooting range here near my house. And so there it sat out in the elements. I lost it in the fall. Winter came and went, And in the spring, after they had mowed down the field, and I had shot another errant shot, this is me bragging about how accurate my shot is. After another errant shot at the same target and looking for that particular arrow, I found the previous arrow from the last season, and the feathers were all but rotted. The back end of the arrow was in pretty rough shape, and this was a cedar arrow even, and cedar of course weathers well, but the shaft of this arrow was pristine. The shaft that was finished with tung oil was pristine. It was like the day I finished it. And so I learned a really good lesson right there. It was a single coat of tung oil, and it survived a winter outdoors in the elements, and looked the same as the day I had finished it. And so since that time, I have been finishing my bows with tung oil. Four coats later. So this is what you can expect out of your tung oil finish if you choose to use it. If you're adverse to a glossy finish, you can come back over this with a real fine steel wool or a pumice mixture to give it more of a satiny finish. I went ahead and wet molded some leather to the grip here, and I'll put a card in the video so that you can access a video where I go over wet molding leather. This was a very easy project right here because there's not much in the way of contour to it. And then for reference sake, I put a floppy arrow rest on there so that I can get a good reference point and get those arrows shooting from the same position each time that they're knocked. But a very easy application. Strip of leather, it starts about here, runs up, doubles over on itself, and then finishes out as the strike plate up top here. So it's all kind of the same piece. Applied again, you guys, with double stick tape. It's not very primitive, but very effective. I love it. Now, with some properly matched arrows and a little bit of practice, certainly get a lot more accurate, but there she is.